No, it doesn't appear to be in the way.
Oh, are we going?
I mean,
We're going.
it's not. I think you put it back up so I can move out of the way.
Okay, so we can call the meeting to order. So here we are, meeting of the Village Planning Board, and who's here? Kevin Harper. Jessica Giles.
I'm all good.
And with us also is Village Attorney Matt Crowe, and our clerk, Andy Morse. Also the applicant is here, and both sides, right? The property owner and INHS.
Great!
Okay, so we have some minutes in front of us, and everyone get a chance to look at them. So we have September 27th, October 25th, and November 29th. So do you want to just take a minute or two to look at them now, or is, I'm not sure if I did. I'm not sure this because we didn't have. So as you read through, if you have, is everyone looking at September? Wow, does anyone remember? I think there was some then, it might have been as gray. But that was largely a discussion meeting, right? So we set some planning board dates, no actions were taken. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes for September 27th? Is there a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor? Do we say that? All in favor?
You say it.
Any opposed? Great. September 27, 2018 minutes approved. So now we have October 25th. This one we looked at, but did not approve because we were waiting for the minutes. So this one we had in our hands last week, or last meeting rather. Right, it's the declaration of the negative declaration, Christmas decoration. In accordance with Seeker, the motion was made by Elder to accept the full EAF assessment. I seconded, and so it passed. And we made some planning board dates, and here we are, January 3rd. It was made in that meeting. Did I go too fast? Are we ready? Motion to approve the minutes, which would then, I know there was someone's point right, so on the October 25th meeting, the motion to approve the seeker's negative determination was made. You have all the ones? Here's October, I just read it.
Here, John, try these ones and get stuck there.
Oh yeah, that's a good.
Right, so
John, you want a minute with October since you just got it, or?
No.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the minutes for October 25th? We have a second?
Second.
Okay, minutes for October 25th are approved. November 29th minutes, oh, we started at 7:10 then. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to vote, sorry. All in favor of approving the minutes for October 25th as is?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. November 29th. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of November 29th?
So moved.
Second? Excellent. Vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. That's passed. Yay! That feels good. Okay, so next is an update from the applicant.
Good evening. Happy holidays, everyone. For the record, my name is Adam Walters. I'm an attorney at Phillips Lytle, representing Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, and co-applicant with Claudia Brenner, Sundale Properties, the property owner. Let's see, first update I want to provide is that we had some discussions with the zoning officer back in September. As the project had evolved a bit, she had asked for more information on two issues that related to a determination on special use permits for the project that Matt, the prior zoning officer, had issued last February. We provided that additional information in September, I believe it was September, and in December we got updated determinations on the two open issues, one of which is, does the community lounge at the building require a special use permit? And two was, does the nursery school require a special use permit? The prior zoning officer had determined that the community center did need a special use permit, but the nursery school did not.
By prior, you mean Mr. Johnston? Oh, excellent. Joining us is Tom Myers. Are you sitting at table, Tom?
No, it's my name here.
Can you please? That would be great. Thank you.
Nothing would make me happy.
So Tom Myers joining us as interim zoning officer and
Okay, so I was just saying, in December, we got updated decisions, really just, I'll say, just coming to opposite conclusions on both issues. So,
Great.
community lounge does not require a special use permit, nursery school does. At least that's the determination. Obviously, we're evaluating that targeted nursery school, and we'll proceed as appropriate.
Right, okay, so my understanding, clarification would be that special use determination for the nursery school unit goes before the BZA. So it's
BZA, right.
Yeah.
And you know, technically, we have 60 days to either appeal the decision or it's binding. Either way, we can proceed to the ZBA. So one of the things we want to talk about is the
Just on the nursery school determination, is there something in writing? on
Yes.
that? Oh,
there's letters on each, two different letters,
okay.
and
So this is from the new, now late zoning officer?
Correct.
right,
And I believe it was somewhere like the 15th or the
Yeah.
17th.
right about
So
there.
that, Tammy has that document too, and for
Yeah.
those of them following the 60-day timeline.
Right, we just want to let everybody know that those determinations have been made.
Great.
And obviously we'll evaluate and take the next steps as appropriate. That does sort of impact some of the agenda items for tonight.
Okay.
One of the things we really want to do is, if we are going to pursue from the ZBA certain variances, and we've talked about parking and or setbacks, we'd like to do that sooner rather than later and kind of get a determination, because that's a process in and of itself. So we would like to suggest we kind of change up the agenda in terms of the items we discuss and cover tonight. The team has been meeting for the last month since your December meeting, kind of reviewing the topics we discussed and preparing for tonight for deep dives on a host of topics. They start with the setback issues and parking, because again, if you, the board, come to a conclusion that you would like us to pursue those variances, we want to get that process rolling. We know stormwater management has been a huge issue, so Andy's come up with some diagrams to help lay that out and run through the details on that. We know we have Lance here as well. And then construction over shallow groundwater was a big issue. On the seeker side, we'd like to spend some time on that. And then finally, Joe is prepared to kind of delve into the details of for sale affordable housing, which has been a question for the board as well. So if we can, we'd like to suggest we do that. We would propose delving deeply into the site access issues next month. We are looking at some of the things the board has raised.
Oi, everybody out there, come on.
So we'll be prepared to delve deeply into that next month.
And just to clarify, by next month, you mean the end of February, or you mean the end of this month?
End of this month, end of January.
Okay, so this month.
Yes, this
So
the next
A
month.
year,
Yes.
2 and something weeks away. Okay.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Quick question.
Of course.
Was it Laura Schneider that determined that the special permit was needed for the nurseries?
Yes,
That was her work. She
Yes.
did that.
she did.
So that information comes from her.
Yes. And she did an analysis and explained why. There's a written determination on that. So everybody should look at it.
We can get that, it's in the Dropbox.
Yeah, it's in the Dropbox, okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Not something. So,
those are the major issues we wanted to cover.
Okay.
And obviously it's up to you, but if you want to delve into setbacks and parking, Ryan is prepared with some ideas and suggestions based on the discussions we had last month.
yeah, I think the problem is, it's, parking is on the agenda. Setbacks we addressed last meeting as being associated with things we were interested in, right? Hannah brought up setbacks, so I don't see why starting with parking as part of the thing on the agenda. Have issues.
To the chair.
Yeah, okay, great, here we go. Parking.
Ryan, you are up, my friend.
Thanks. Good evening, once again, Ryan Kovac from Trowbridge Wolf Michaels and Civil Architects. So these two issues of setback and parking, I think, are actually quite interrelated. We heard a lot of comments from the board at the last board meeting regarding the impacts of parking on the character of the neighborhood and really having to do with the pedestrian quality of the neighborhood and really how far the buildings are set back relative. So, and the relationship really between driveways and parking. So on numerous accounts, numerous board members have, I think both John and Victoria specifically have called out that you don't understand how stacked parking works. The proposal as has been put forward to date is as of right, is respecting the 2-to-1 parking ratio per dwelling unit. The idea of stacked parking is perhaps laborious for the tenants and or owners of individual dwelling units, but very simply it's the idea that if you take an approximate parking space of 10 by 20 nominally, they're stacked one on top of the other. So it takes two people to move two cars. One is pulling in behind the one that pulls all the way further in. One reason that they were developed in that configuration is that stacking them horizontally side by side, which does not require two people to maneuver and juggle cars, really starts to make the streetscape feel like a parking lot. Insofar that you basically are seeing the bumpers of cars as opposed to the front ones, the front porches, etc. It also potentially has further impacts in that if you spread parking side by side, there's a higher likelihood that the headlights of cars as you pull into a pull-in space are shining into the front windows of individual homes. So those are two really strong, compelling reasons in which we developed the parking in the configuration that it's been in for quite some time. And when I say stacked parking, that's really exclusive to the standalone multifamily, not the parcel 12 in the middle, which is its own large multifamily unit that has something more of a conventional, albeit noted as feeling institutional parking. So we, as the team, are very open to alternatives. The design, again, was developed really to respect the zoning as written. We've looked at what it would potentially mean to the site to reduce the number of parking. I think that globally we feel that it would be a benefit to the visual qualities. It would be a benefit potentially to the feeling of the neighborhood as a whole. That being said, there would probably want to be different strategies for different units. And one possibility that we've discussed internally as a team is that for sale units might want to retain a 2-to-1 ratio, whereas rental properties might potentially want to be open to a variance that would be a reduction to the total amount, something less than a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parking spaces to 1 dwelling unit. One other thing that's been noted, and I think we've danced around it and perhaps discussed it, albeit not in recent times, the logistics of visitors, where do visitors park when they come to visit someone. And so if there were to be a reduction in parking above the current levels, it might behoove us to consider designated visitor parking strategically located and dispersed throughout the entirety of the development to facilitate exactly that, people visiting, relative locations within the site. One other thing, and it's related to stormwater and it's related to the setbacks specifically. The amount of impervious surface is directly correlated to the amount of parking spaces. So there's a residual benefit insofar that if we are going to move forward and consider the idea of reducing the ratio of parking below the 2-to-1 ratio in the zoning, it potentially is going to reduce the amount of impervious surface. The configuration of parking, if you reject the notion of the legitimacy of stacked parking, quite frankly, that's not desirable. There's a trade-off there. Insofar that if you were to do something that is more of a conventional, what I'm going to call a hammerhead, which is a driveway that then turns to the left or turns to the right, certainly that's a benefit in the sense of maneuvering and not having to go cars, but it comes at the cost of additional area of pavement. So these things are all things that we're balancing. I don't want to jump to the other topic, but front yard setbacks are directly related to this. A parking space of 20 feet in a 50-foot front yard setback leaves you a 30-foot depth of open space between the head of the car and the front of the building. If you were to reduce the front yard setback, certainly the sidewalks get shorter, the walk from your car to your front door becomes shorter. However, the relative sense of open space and the amount of green in the front of the house, the front yard, potentially is a very different feel than that of something which is 50 feet deep, which is currently what's shown. With that, I think I'd just like to open it for discussion and get your feedback. I know that you've had a lot of thoughts.
Can we just have a question?
We discussed this several times, that we found it awkward as to who has the primary choice to pull in, and then you can't pull out. In other words, it's a no-win situation. You get the parking space, but then you can't go anywhere. Or you can go someplace. Could you explain that one more time, how you do a quartet of the 4 cars and how that really functions? Or are there preordained sort of concepts there that I'm not fully grasping? How do you maneuver your way in and out of that situation?
I mean, just anecdotally to share
Yes,
this. I grew up in a Queen
Humor
Anne,
helps.
I grew up in a Queen Anne Victorian single lot, 2-story wood frame house with a single driveway, which was, slightly wider than the car and ran at least the length of the house. 2-car family, 2 working parents, 1 car pulls in, pulls far enough into the driveway to allow for a second car, at least 20 feet nominally, to pull in behind it.
But so then you are talking about some space to the side of these cars, are you not? To maneuver.
Well,
No.
No,
Straight in, straight.
see how this looks
Yeah.
like, more like,
Yeah, so there are 2 cars.
this belongs to one unit and this belongs to another unit.
We're looking at lot numbers record, and there's single stack parkway. So there's 2 cars single stack.
Yes.
It's exactly that. The first person that pulls in is in essence blocked by the second.
Right.
And the same with this, right? So this belongs to a different unit than that.
They're in the same house. So they're in the same house. So this person needs to go. This person has to go.
Okay, so we're looking at it, do we have the big map that we had up on a thing? John, what did we do? You made a beautiful map, John. You made one up on a board. Let's flip it up and then we'll show. So we were looking at one of the lots here and Ryan will go over it. And it is it is that, right, like one's in, one's out, that's how my driveway is.
I mean, it works insofar that it's 2 cars within one single household. And that's it. You're not,
There it is.
it's not your neighbor's car parking behind you, it's your spouse, your roommate, co-host.
But it does require the pull out of one car to the road, so you have to back out and pull. What's that happens?
Actually, so I live in a little Victorian Buffalo, we have a single driveway. My wife pulls in, I pull in behind her. We keep the keys by the front door. If she's got to go and I'm not around, she pulls out the car, go gets her car, and sometimes she'll take my car. But it's not ideal,
It's not ideal.
but it works. It's not,
Well, and the other option, you said a hammerhead configuration is much more pavement.
Yes. But we didn't want to build big parking lots behind every one of these, because the other option is, you know, a parking lot back here where you drive in and you have a parking lot in the back.
Right.
And we prefer to not have large parking lots with lots of pavement right in the way.
Did you want to get closer? Did you get the?
Oh, no, we were just having a hard time hearing.
Oh, hearing, sorry. All of it, it's
From
all
an-
too close.
From an environmental stance, it's the most efficient way to park insofar that it is the lowest amount of impervious surface you could provide and have a legitimate parking scenario for 2 cars.
Although we do have a lot of solutions today using brick and other paving devices to make the parking lot that absorbs water.
Sure. Yes, I mean, the materiality, other than asphalt, is a
There's a lot of-
separate yet related issue, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of different directions.
Right, I'm really addressing the configuration and
More than
metric.
the materials.
Than
I understand.
materiality.
I think Rick has a.
Yeah, one other thought on reducing the amount of parking, which generally, I like the concept. But one of the issues that has come up occasionally in the village here is when there's not enough parking for all the cars you want to park,
Yeah.
you make ad hoc parking places. And, that's probably not all that desirable either. I mean, it does seem to me you have to sort of try to make a reasonable calculation of what the number of cars per unit are going to be. Otherwise, people are going to come up with their own solutions, some of which will be parking on the street, some of which will be parking in their neighbor's front yard,
right,
So, I mean, internally, we've looked at it, and I think we feel that there's ample opportunity for potential reduction beyond the 2 to 1, and then really it's at your discretion and advisement as to whether or not you feel that's something that we should pursue.
But you are talking about impermeable surface, not.
yes.
We could have the conversation about materiality. In general, when you're building over, and this is, I'll let Andy weigh in on this, but when you're building over a high groundwater scenario, there's potentially not a whole lot of benefit to the idea of varying something to a pervious condition, as opposed to an impervious asphalt or conventional driveway.
And Johnny, gravel driveway over time may be somewhat pervious when you put it in, but for purposes of stormwater runoff, it is considered impervious as well. So you have to have a very loose stone, which isn't very fun to walk on or drive on.
Oh, wow.
Or snow removal, correct?
So just what we're proposing is 2 cars for all the townhouses that are for sale. Any for sale property would have 2 cars. And then the rental, we went and did a parking analysis of all of our rental property. And then what we do is put basically a locational factor on that. So we look at what someone's income is, how large their family is, and how many cars they have. And typically, lower income people with smaller families have less cars. And it also, but that family, if they're in a very rural location, might have more. So that's why the locational factor is important. And when we look at that, we basically determine that in this case, about 1.2 cars per unit makes some sense. So what that means is for 46 rental units, we're talking about 54 parking spaces plus 10 visitor parking. So that's kind of how we would look at this particular situation.
So how would you meter that if, say, somebody just parked in perpetuity in the visitor parking space because they got a certain car?
We have a property manager who's there, if not every day, several times a week. We also have a maintenance person who's there either every day or many times during the week. And they basically monitor the parking. They know who has a car, and they will ticket people and have them towed. Or that, first they'll provide basically a violation notice, which we do if we need to. But we typically find that our estimate of parking is pretty accurate in terms of what people need. We don't really have a lot of issues with, we don't have enough parking for people. It just hasn't been a problem.
So, I mean, just as a point, 54 for rental units is a substantial drop. And one thing that we had noted, we kind of walked out of the last meeting, really compelled, honestly, by the feedback that you've given us as a board, and so far that the parking on the north side of the multifamily, the largest building, really works to sever it from the streetscape, and in a sense it divorces it from a sense of neighborhood if you're determining neighborhood as a walkable sidewalk, eye connection, to the building experience. So in dropping down to 1.2, you could potentially remove in its entirety or to a great amount, the amount of parking on the north side, reallocate approximately 10 to the south side, and pull the building closer to the street, which we think really is in the spirit, perhaps more of what we interpreted your comments to be in this time.
Kind of design. For that. Okay.
It's a building not surrounded by parking, which I think we all agree is not a bad thing.
So I think what we're asking for in terms of the parking issue is just kind of a clear consensus from the board that that concept makes sense. We'd have to proceed to an application for an area variance to the zoning board of appeals, and they would make a determination on whether that makes sense. If they say no, obviously, we have to meet the code requirements. If they say yes, we are talking about a design revision that will substantially reduce that parking, with the goal being to kind of eliminate that parking on the north side of the building.
Now, that would have to be combined with a reduction in setback as well.
It really, that's the next part of the equation. And we have, I don't want to steal Ryan's thunder.
Well, Vince has something to.
On the parking,
Yeah.
some of the techniques that we've seen before is if there is some hesitation to reduce parking because you never know when that need arises, there's land bank parking. What it is they design for it now, they show it now, but ultimately it doesn't get built now, it just remains green. And it remains grass until the need arises where they need to build. And then it gets built at that point in time. They don't have to come back to you guys, they don't have to ask, they go get their permits from the town, from the village, and they construct it upon need. But it may provide you guys with the reduction that you're looking for, and at the same time, provide the flexibility that the board's looking for the what-if scenario. The stormwater would be designed to handle that build-out now, so we wouldn't be changing the amount of runoff that's going to be going to the stormwater facility. They would have to be designed to handle that what-if scenario. But the parking lots and the spaces, or some of the spaces, may not need to be built now. They could be stored as land bank parking for future use. It's an option that we've seen be used in other areas, similar to this. With the single loaded driveways, I guess from our standpoint, we agree there's potential reduction in impervious surface by doing that. It also could add impervious surface because you're adding sidewalk to get to those locations where you've sprawled them out throughout the site. So there may be ability there to provide shared driveway, a single point of entrance, and then go to your single loaded to cut down the number of entrances to a village road. One for public safety reasons, and another is just elimination of some of the cuts in and out of the village road. And may reduce sidewalk need in that area. That's another way to reduce impervious surface altogether, is there isn't necessarily a need for all the sidewalk that you guys are providing. Obviously, for ADA compliancy and pedestrian accessibility, there's ways we can accommodate it without putting sidewalk in everybody's property, to and from the building, to and from the parking lots, etc. There's other surfaces that you can use as well, that we can accommodate that goal. Porous concrete is an option. I agree with you guys that, the depth of water table, you may not get a lot of, you're not gonna get a lot of that benefit that you would otherwise get, but I sometimes make the argument that what benefit you do get is still better than the one, you might achieve some of that benefit still. Some of the areas that we've seen it is where the parking lot abuts the stormwater areas. And those spaces may otherwise be porous concrete, where, the storage of snow, the storage of other things around those areas where it otherwise help infiltrate into the ground as opposed to just running off the surface. There's other problems that comes along with that as well, but that's something we can work out in terms of maintenance and those issues. But I just wanted to at least offer that land bank option in case that was an option to consider.
Yeah, thanks. Ryan, before you get to the setback stuff, which might overlap with this a little bit, but have you sort of begun thinking about where visitor parking lots might go?
It's probably premature to say, but equally distributed throughout the site is really, I think, paramount in the underlying tenets of the concept. So, having them at both ends of the loop and potentially an interstitial point in the middle.
The number that you handle with signage rather than having a whole lot on one corner designated. We would have visitor signs throughout. That's how we typically do it.
And we had talked internally, we've been talking about a number around 10. So if you imagine splitting that, twice or 3 times, you're talking about a relatively small number.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to ganging them in entirely.
I think coincidentally, Anna and I met yesterday, and we were talking about that whole issue of doing away with the surround of parking and making the apartment units more part of the community by moving them further to the sidewalk. So I think the 2 of us are pretty positive on that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Closer to the sidewalks.
Closer to the sidewalk.
Can you help me visually go around? So when we're talking about reducing parking spaces, as we look at that outer loop, right, with lots, oh my gosh, I'm looking at this teeny tiny thing. Yeah, all of those remain unchanged from that, or those would have some reduction as well?
It's not, and going way back in the history of this project, it was always, or it has been for a very long time, our intent, both from public input and you as a board, to try not to, make it obvious as to which is the affordable and which is the market rate. So the housing that is on the outer loop of the crescent is a mixture of both.
So those parking spaces would remain as is and would not be seeking a variance?
No, I'm sorry, let me further clarify. So some of those are rental and some of them are market rate and some of them are affordable for sale. The market rate we're suggesting would stay at a 2-to-1 as per the zone. The affordable for sale we're suggesting would stay at a 2-to-1 and the rentals would be reduced to
1.
1.2.
And can you just, because it's so teeny tiny, can you tell me again which one are the rentals? I know that it's in this code, I might have it.
Actually, what I would say on that is that we should look at the townhouses and see what number of bedrooms are there.
So that's where my brain is
If there's a 3-bedroom in
going,
a townhouse, we don't want to reduce the parking.
Right.
If it's a 1-bedroom end unit, then it's probably okay to have one.
So here's the idea, if we're talking about single families, 1 car is fine, we've determined by their economic level that they typically have 1 car, but now they have a teenager, and that teenager needs a job so they can go to college, now you need 2 cars. But I'm sorry, you have a house with 1 space and nowhere to go. So what does that look like?
So I think, what we would do is take a look at what bedroom types are in that ring of the rentals and potentially keep it the way it is. And they would also have the opportunity, because remember, it's 1 owner, to park additional cars in the other lot, the larger building lot as well.
Except, well, what do you mean? But only as like a guest? That's
No,
They're not numerically designated
Yeah, so
parking spaces, so
if this is a-
theoretically,
if this is a rental townhouse,
Yeah. Can you
and
say
they
the lot
have an
number,
extra,
please?
sorry?
Could you say the lot number? that
Oh,
you're pointing
it's
at?
4.
Okay, thanks.
And I can't remember honestly if this is a rental or
It
a
is
for
a
sale. So that's okay, that's a rental.
It
So
says it's orderable for sale.
it's hard for us to.
I know, okay.
we've mixed it so well.
But as an
So if
example.
they have an extra car,
Mhm.
we know from our experience that not everyone in this building is going to have a car. There will be extra spaces here, that they'll be able to use a space here, because this is owned by the same owner as this. And it'll be managed by the same property manager, and so they will keep track of who
So
has
they
a
would come
car.
and say, we need another space.
We need another
and we would
space,
say,
and we'll
okay, we
give
can
them-
allocate one for you here because Frank doesn't have a car.
Exactly, we'll actually number the spaces in a lot of cases, and so they'll have space number 34.
I like that notion of planning the land bank for parking. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of ways to do it, and some of it is, maybe they've identified several parking spaces around the rental area that they know they don't necessarily need, but in lieu of just removing them from the site, they designate them as future buildable parking spaces upon need. So the plans would ultimately look the same as they do now. They would just be identified as land bank so that they wouldn't be built now. They would be designed for now, stormwater wouldn't change, none of the infrastructure would change. So they would have to put it in a location that would cause the least amount of impact to the infrastructure, but that's typically what it would look like, and then just be green. There's a lot of places that have high parking requirements, and in order to meet the parking requirements, they're required to obviously show it, but there isn't a need for those spaces, so they land bank it. I rarely ever see them in need to build it, but
Well, what is that, so in the spaces that we're talking about, it wouldn't drastically change the visual of the landscaping for that practice to be in place, would it? So like suddenly, that would have been beautiful, but now it's just flat and
What-
green and what's going on?
What you can imagine is really kind of ends at the end of stack parking in the lot 12, parcel 12. Make sure, yeah, it's lot 12. And parking spaces, you could start to chip away. So
Okay.
basically, you would allow yourself the expansion laterally, horizontally, to build out from what is the end of the stack, if you will, should the need arise.
But it gives you less flexibility in terms of design, like eliminating this altogether, right? And pulling the building up, because you still have to show it on the plan. It may stay green for a while, it may stay green forever, but you can't move the building into it, you know what I mean? So less flexibility in your design if you go with the land banking approach. But you
Well,
don't have
that's
to go
if
to
you
the
land
ZBA.
banked right there.
Yes.
Why couldn't you land bank somewhere else?
Right.
Well, and it's if you land banked at the same ratio, at a 2-to-1 ratio.
Right.
So the question is, say, hypothetically, we determined 1.2 is the ideal ratio. However, you want to be more conservative and allow for future growth, we could bump it to 1.4, which theoretically would still allow us to not have to build the
Right
upper
there.
brow. We could, stack further south of the building, thereby achieving what John and Hannah have designed.
Wisely
discussed and
brought to
advised.
Right, so it does sound like there is support on the board for pursuing a variance for parking.
Yeah.
But tell me if I'm wrong.
No, is there anyone on the board currently like to say anything about not pursuing a variance for parking from the applicant through PZO?
I kind of like the idea of playing a little conservative, so you determine 1.2, here, 1.4, just so that, we're on the safe side, and then that land bank idea.
And then my other point, or thought rather, is that if my option with needing a third car is somewhere on this property or Main Street or, right, like somewhere on this property, so maybe it's not conveniently located right in front of this land bank if we're trying to, if you apply for a setback variance, get it, move the building, the large building to be more community oriented, but somewhere on the site is better than not.
Yeah.
On the 17, you're looking at walk. A little further.
Never.
A little, yeah, no, I'll do that.
Yeah. So just to kind of continue that discussion, are we talking about a applying for a variance for, say, 1.4, but land banking then the difference between 1.2 and 1.4, and those additional spaces would be added later if needed. We'd have to figure out a mechanism, right? The lawyers are always thinking about, well,
Sure.
who's going to make that determination and when? Code enforcement officer also.
Yeah, does that,
So we'll have to think about that. I'm sure Lance has some examples for us of how,
I haven't seen many where they had to build it, but that's, the
Right.
benefit is
there's a
that.
mechanism.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
there?
It's basically complaint driven, right? You know, somebody identifies that they're seeing issues on site, whether it's you guys do your maintenance and you're like, they're parking on our lawn now, we have the ability to expand 10 more parking spaces, let's do that.
Right.
You would then approach the town, they pull up the plan and say, look, you got 10 to 12 more spaces that you were approved to do, go do it.
Go do it.
Tom, is that ringing any alarm bells for you at this time?
The thing I always wonder about, given my position is enforcement, say we have this bank of parking spots, the parking ratio is not working out.
Yep.
People are parking here, there, everywhere. The manager says, look, you know, he's writing tickets all the time, we gotta do this. What is to compel whoever at this point to increase those parking spaces? Because then it's real money.
Right. I think mechanism-wise, what would happen is the code enforcement officer would report back to the planning board that there's an issue. Planning board would then make a decision, do we want to enact the land bank spaces? You've already approved the site plan. but you
Based
would-
on this concept?
Right, but you would, and you were the ones who approved land banking, so conceptually, you, the planning board, would agree that, no, you need to build. And then you would go to the landowner and say, you have to build them, otherwise you're in violation of your site plan.
So my additional duties would be inspecting the parking and seeing that there's, I'm looking at, you know, what my position
Sure.
entails, and it wouldn't be seeing that the parking's overcrowded unless, you know, the citizenry gets up with the
it's mostly
torches and pitchforks, and I really don't want to have to respond to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, like 90% of code enforcement, right, is responding to complaints and then you see the issue. At least that's all, in a lot of communities, that's how it works. So you're not out there inspecting, but if calls are coming in, you know, you've got an issue, you got to look into it, that kind of thing.
Lance, have you seen?
No, in these
have
scenarios-
you done?
Most of the time in these scenarios, it's the applicant's the one that will identify the need first before the code enforcement officer, because they're the ones who see it every day, and they're the ones maintaining the site, and so now it becomes an issue for them.
I'll start getting complaints, I don't have anywhere to park my car,
In
this
most
person's in my spot, I had that spot, you know, so mostly, that's what I've also seen it this way too, is that the owner says, I really want to build these extra 10 spots, you know.
But the idea is because it's an approved site plan, we wouldn't have to come back to the planning board.
Right.
But you'd be designing for it now, which is why that.
Right, so
that's
stormwater
the area
needs.
Right.
So, again, just to summarize, I think what we're hearing is support of the concept of reducing based on studies you've done of your own tenants. Obviously, we'd have to present that to the ZBA, and they'd have to buy in their analysis because they have to grant the minimum variances necessary as a general rule. I think we'd ask for 1.2, and then as a part of the site plan approval process, assuming they give that, we would then deal with the land banking issue and sort of require us to design for 1.4 with those extra spaces being identified clearly on the site plan as to what's land banked, and we'd work with Lance and Guy and come up with a site plan approval condition that would make that effective both for the applicant to come forward and say we need it, and for the town to be able, the village to be able to say, you gotta pay, you gotta do it.
So you would go to the ZBA and ask for a variance for 1.2. They would grant that, and then you would come back and say, whatever, here. None of this happens, all of this happens, whatever. 1.2 gets approved, but then you come back and say, we have a variance for 1.2, but we're gonna build to 1.4.
You would tell us as part of site
And
plan
we
approval.
can say that once you have a variance for
Oh, yeah.
1.2? Okay,
You can require more parking, and you can require all of it to be paved.
okay,
That's site
okay,
plan.
okay.
And if everybody goes for 1.4, you have the land for it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
You have it, no problem.
well, that's what it's
Right,
built
right,
to already, is for
Right.
2.
We're at 2-to-1 now,
Mhm.
so 1.4 is
Is
easy.
absorbable.
All we're doing is taking spaces off at that point.
Okay.
Like, we wouldn't be reducing it any more than the variance did. You're adding spaces to the variance.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're just gonna be green.
No, I just wanted to be like, no, we could do it for 1.2, and they, yeah,
Okay, that's really helpful for us, and I think you've given us some clear direction on parking. Let us spend a few minutes on setback and what that would mean and how that might work. And then Lance had raised several issues, all related to these discussions, about stacked parking, materials, and amount of sidewalk. I think those are all things we'd like to just try and cover as part of this discussion. Again, our goal is to have clear feedback and kind of make all the plan changes at once as we run through all of these sets of issues, and then kind of come back to you with a comprehensive update.
Okay.
So, setbacks of buildings, what are we talking about and how would it work?
Okay, so let me open by saying I think, Trumansburg is kind of a front porch community in my mind. And
We have a porch fest now.
Yeah.
Tammy loves it.
I do.
The relationship between the sidewalk and the front of the building, I think, is paramount. So it's the semi-public space, it's the opportunity where you get to, know your neighbors and engage with them at arm's length, right? It doesn't happen at 50-foot setbacks. It's really, people are small when they're 50 feet away. They're not casual conversation distance. So we walked out of the last meeting, again, hearing the comments, and the first thing we did was just, very crudely shoved every building to a 25-foot setback, and you'd be amazed how much better and more neighborhood-esque it feels in cutting that setback in half.
And again, we're talking about front setbacks.
Front yard setback specifically. There's some nuances here that I think are worth diving into. First of all, with regards to the largest lot and the largest building and the desire to justify it closer to the street that it fronts to the north, this is the setback line here. The reason that building is well over, something in the magnitude of 100 feet away from the edge of the road, is because the parking is there.
Right.
So if we are granted a variance and are able to allocate parking only to the south side, even without a reduction to a front yard setback, you still have the option to move that building closer to the road. There are probably fire access nuances that are going to inform what needs to happen on the north side of that building, depending on the relative distance to the road. But in a sense, that building could move close to the road even if we weren't granted it.
And to be clear, the document that you're referring to on this board that the people behind you can't see and the people can't see is not a new document. You're simply showing us the 2017 picture and showing us what it is now and how that would move. So those are documents that have all been available and can be reviewed by the public, correct?
Correct. Thank you for clarifying that for the record.
And we have our most recent update for review at your table. Okay.
The stacked
So we all
parking,
secretly want big slides right now.
the stacked parking is 40-foot deep. So if you can imagine reducing a front yard setback to something in the 25 to 30 range, suddenly you've negated the opportunity to put stacked parking directly in front of a house. There are a lot of, as many comments and nuances as you could speak to. I think we would value your additional input as to your thinking about this. If you would envision the setback being uniform for all buildings so that they're equal distant from the edge of the road to the sidewalk, or if variance between them is a desirable quality. I mean, it's a relative how homogeneous versus varied would you prefer to see that. But if nothing else, I just want to draw to your attention that, where there are parking spaces that are in line, basically within the front yard, within the confines of the building that they serve, those would either need to shift, further outboard into the side yard to allow the, much like a traditional 1950s neighborhood where your driveway runs along the side of your house as opposed to in front of your house. So there are opportunities, depending on the lot, the configuration, and the next iteration of what the site plan might look like. If we were to go after and be granted a variance for reduction of side yard, it would be tethered to the parking conversation because they're interconnected. And then, as Lance had noted, there's extensive sidewalks that lead from the furthest edge of the furthest inboard edge of the head, if you will, of the parking spaces to the front door. You can imagine that the amount of impervious surface and the length of those sidewalks equally would be diminished if the driveways are that much more approximate to the front and or side doors, or back doors for that matter, of individual dwelling units.
So you can see it's really hard to start to redesign without, because there's so many ripple effects on everything you touch. It's really a question of what the board prefers.
That's a tough question because it depends on building materials, the actual size and what the shape of the building, the architecture, what it looks like, the color it is. Some things back and forth work wonderfully. Sometimes an even, uniform line of buildings, if you think of the great older European cities where you have that, especially England, complete conformity, sidewalk, street, and building next to building, facade next to facade. This would be easier to think about with a couple of samples in front, something you could look at.
Sure.
The affordable ones and the market ones, so that we can see the scale and just have some kind of three-dimensional view of something. To start thinking whether we should be jutting back and forth. Or maybe do 6 in a row and then do a little something. It's a tough one. It also depends on landscaping.
We did provide, but we did provide building design schematics in that last submittal. They were previously submitted, but again, there's been so many things submitted that things get lost a little bit. But that last submittal we did in November, we just tried to pull together the most important things. And so the building design materials are under Exhibit H.
I didn't see those, but I didn't know how final those were. I thought I was just seeing more of a schematic.
Yeah, so they're schematic now because that discussion needs to happen and you need to tell us if you want to see changes. I guess it becomes a chicken and egg issue on the one hand. Certainly planning to delve into architecture at the next meeting with Steve Holden.
So let's,
with some visuals that be easy to
yeah, so let's keep in mind a really good point that it does actually depend on what they look like. But let's talk about them as beautiful objects, undefined at the moment. So we can talk about the space, because I'm wondering, would that literally mean that everything's sort of, if it's 50 and you make it 25, do we all come even closer to the center?
That's right.
So there's
The
even
rear
more
yard.
green space
Or
as
green
currently
space.
existing abutters,
Okay.
if a variance were approved.
Right.
Okay, and then my second question, and that would be if you, I don't know, but then aesthetically, I don't know, it all look nice if they're all in the same little row like teeth, maybe not. But what about the pocket neighborhoods? So those are turned, those are farther, you would then maybe architecturally, visually say, yeah, it's nice we could be at 25, but those are going to be set back to create.
I mean, the spatial configuration of these buildings will definitely define what the character of the neighborhood feels like.
Right.
And one of the things that I would say is that given that we're already aligned along a curve, and I think that we're all, it's easy to imagine this as a flat site.
But it's
And
really
we
not.
provided you with section, one major section through here that was an attempt to illustrate just how that is not true whatsoever. It really goes from high ground to low ground. So both in the topography sense, in the fact that it's not a flat as a pancake site, and the fact that the road is curved, there's already a very organic, dare I say, naturalistic feel to the neighborhood. Even if they were to have uniform setbacks of every front porch being equidistant to the street, I think you would still find it would not feel homogeneous as it would if it were lined
A row
up
street,
flat.
right, Hampton, more.
Yeah.
So I think, John, you're recalling the Sallow Drive last meeting as a curve is kind of an interesting thing, that if they're all not, right, that is a curve. What does the house feel like there? They're certainly not. hard against each other.
Yeah, I think Vicky's right. It all depends on context, but I find a fixed setback is kind of boring, usually. So I'd be open to either, depending on the building design.
I don't think it's your job as a planning board necessarily to imagine a proposal for us. And I think that we can come back to you with some typical conditions, looking at the configurations of building adjacencies that show both homogeneous and something less than homogeneous, and allow you to weigh in, with an actual graphic that they're looking for.
Well, am I right too that, let's say the BZA says, okay, yeah, we can do 25-foot setbacks. You don't have to do it.
Right, that's just a minimum.
That's right.
You could
It's
do
the minimum. You could,
45.
some could say 50, some could.
You could do less than that.
And the For Market could choose to be built back farther if they
Sure.
wanted, right, that window.
It is a good point because, the BZA, the minimum right now is set by the code. If we go to a variance, the BZA, they'll set a minimum. Obviously, there's flexibility, just as there is with the parking. So perhaps if the board has some consensus on what that variance request should look like, we can start to frame that up and do some analysis. Again, I think the question is, are we talking 25 for a setback instead of 50? Are we talking 30? Are we talking 40? Each has a very different feel from a neighborhood perspective. Yeah.
John, I feel like you have some of those stats right on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you go down South Street, most of the building, I should say, the porches are 20 feet back from the sidewalk.
And so that's actually a really good point, because if you have a 25-foot setback, Tom, and you want to build a porch, do you have to get a variance to build a porch forward? So that's a great point.
The porch is considered part of the building.
Part of this building. So so let's repeat that again, especially because there might be some folks who are chatting in the back who didn't quite hear, which is that a majority of the streets houses on South Street have a 20-foot.
Between 20
Between
and 30.
porch, 20 and 30.
Depends where on South Street.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Right.
Is that right?
And there's one
The
that's
further
quite
you
a way
go
back.
down South Street,
Right.
the
Further it
bigger
goes.
the setback.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the character of the type of architecture that we put forward, it's porch culture. It's that semi-public space that wants to engage with the pedestrian sidewalk, that wants to, allow you to get to know your neighbor. We're trying to create a neighborhood.
Which, again, just to reiterate, makes it safer for everybody. When you know your neighbor, right? That's how New York City actually worked.
One other thing that I did want to clarify that was something we truthed out in just our initial explorations. There are side yard setbacks, and many of these parcels are, to exaggerate, pie-shaped insofar that the sideline, the side yard lines kind of radiate out from in a radial way. They're not perfect rectangles. The point I would like to make is that you could move at a 25 and most likely at a 20 as well. You could move all of these buildings forward without adjusting the actual width of the
The
parcel.
side yard, and the side yard setback would still be.
They would be compliant with the existing
Okay.
side yard.
Except lot number 4.
Except lot number 4.
Yeah, there is one that broke where it's very tight to the side yard setback.
So
And
that
we
building-
discussed how, you could potentially solve that architecturally, you could deviate the setback for that parcel to be deeper. But that is, of all the parcels in totality, that's the only one that there's a bust, if you will, of the building footprint as currently drawn, exceeding the side yard setback.
Now, when you are, the metric of 25 feet setback is based on distance from edge of road or edge of sidewalk. What I was telling you was it's about 20 to 30 feet from edge of sidewalk.
It's the back edge of sidewalk. It's the property line, which is one and the same as the back edge of sidewalk.
Yeah. So that sidewalk is set to be right on the front of the right of way.
I mean, there's some very traditional, conventional things here. We've got, you know, road edge, tree lawn, sidewalk, front yard, houses. As much as it's-
Are most of the buildings going to have decks or front porches of some sort? 'Cause
I
that's what
believe-
you call it.
They all do, yeah.
And
Even the multi.
any dialogue about, you have quite a bit of fencing on your Hancock Street project. It made everything extremely condensed, but I suppose this is not going to call for that.
We're not proposing.
You're not proposing
It's
that.
a, yeah, very different sort of
So
situation.
decks and porches, but not fences.
That's right.
Okay.
Similarly, I just draw your attention as far as the focus on porches, the multifamily, largest building has multiple ground level porches as well. Exterior covered open spaces porches. So again, moving it closer to the road frontage. Tables.
And I know you did, when we did one of the more early versions, when you submitted them, you did do the line of sight cross-section, which also, when we start talking about final architectural design, will be super huge. Thanks. So I'm feeling like 25 feet setbacks from the edge of the sidewalk for front yard makes sense. I don't have any reason to feel otherwise if there needs to be variance. Anybody else? Yeah, no? Thinking about it?
Well, you know, it's
Like 30 better?
it's all about context, right? Like John said, so whatever, I would, you know, it's kind of a situation, you know, sort of, what kind of a community do you want, number one, and then what's the architectural sort of standard for creating a community that does that?
So again, aren't we in the same position with the land banking? If it gets approved for 25 feet, coming back to the plan, you'd be like, yeah, this is where I should get it come back.
Could do that, sure.
So, safe either way.
If we wanted to follow John's lead, if you wanted to provide yourself the greatest flexibility, perhaps you would want to go with 20 feet with the understanding that it could be greater than 20 feet.
Yeah,
I like 25.
I'm going to throw up the attorney hat and say, you know, the ZBA has a state mandated test they have to apply. And it's looking at the size of the variance. So 50-foot setback, if we're going for 20, that's a pretty substantial, that's something they have to take into account. You know, and in general, it's about minimum variances, though the area variance obviously is a balancing test. So I think what we're hearing is we should pursue a variance for the front yard setback. But specific variances may need to be kind of dictated by building shape, size, layout, etc. And maybe we need to kind of put something together and have a dialogue. Actually, you know, if we do submit an application with specific, because we'd have to update the site plan for that. Because we have to show the ZBA what we're doing. I believe, I haven't looked at your code in a while, but do BZA variances get referred to the planning board for recommendation?
No,
No? Okay. Many communities do. But we can certainly come back with that and show you what we've done. And obviously, as part of the site plan process, you do have a lot of discussion.
I would suggest in the meantime that we all, each of us, look at the examples in the village. It is quite variable. I mean, on Wick Street, houses are practically on the sidewalk, and then you go to Washington Street, it's substantially back. That's all about feel.
It seems like it's safe to say nobody feels like 50 feet is the right number. So some sort of variance will be necessary. And I know the village is going through a code revision analysis process. Again, maybe just plant that seed for a future meeting at some point. That probably needs to be revisited. It's just too large and too suburban.
That seed has been sitting for like 3 years.
Yeah. Okay,
Just waiting.
fair enough.
But thank you. So I feel like this might, unless we missed, wait, you had more. This is actually your presentation.
Well, I think we've gotten clear direction on setback issues and parking. Very helpful. I think as we move forward, we're hearing, again, Lance raised a lot of these issues. We need to think about the materials. The staff parking issue, we're going to revisit that in light of the parking variance and how that plays out and the setbacks. Because as Ryan pointed out, it's going to have an impact. So I think we have what we need for tonight on those issues. We will also attack the visitor spaces and how those might be distributed as part of a kind of an approach. That takes us, I think, to stormwater management.
And then I do want to, at some point, we can after that, talk about walkability, because there's a sidewalk thing.
Sure.
Okay.
And
But that is also going to be stormwater management, so.
Yeah. And so while Andy's teeing up, I'll just remind everybody. So you spent quite a bit of time on stormwater management as part of the seeker process. It was clear that as part of site plan review, the board wanted to do a deeper dive on stormwater issues. So we asked Andy to kind of think about how to take all the stuff he knows in his head, and that is in those complicated reports, and put it on a diagram and try to make it plain and understandable. Good luck.
I'll do my best. I'm not sure how plain understandable this will be. What I want to try to do is just kind of.
Can you step back so we can see some of this, please?
Well, yeah, as long as it's a bit super far away.
Thank you.
John, can you see that? I think that works. Andy?
Last night,
You're good. We'll do it. I can move if I need to.
Andy, make sure that,
John, can you see? We don't mind. We'll watch it on the YouTube.
Lance, can you just make sure the camera's not being blocked?
I can't see her.
Sorry, excuse me for 1 second. Camera is blocked just a little bit.
Walk up. It's really fast right now.
You're good.
okay. So this map is what's included in your package. This is part of the preliminary calculation package. So this is a diagram of the existing watershed conditions before we even talk about the development. So I kind of want to give you an idea of how we arrive at our calculations and at the inputs that we put into the program. So the site is outlined in orange, property boundary proper, South Street, Pennsylvania Avenue. We take a look first at the contours. So these dashed lines are all the grades, the contours on the site. We say, where is the water going? And we try to identify watersheds. So you have to say watershed, where is the outline of growth that is heading to a certain point? So we know that water, the majority of the site, moves from the northwest to the southeast corner of the site. So following the contours, we identify this one watershed 1. Now all of that water heads down into this area. So we kind of define that word. We do the same thing for any other watersheds that affect the site that will be impacting watershed 2 that heads more to the northeast and heading to South Street. Then within that, what the colors are indicating is what are the cover types. Where do we have impervious area? Where do we have lawn? Where do we have woods? Where do we have meadow? So you'll see, obviously, a lot of the pink is meadow. We have some hedgerows for the woods. We have lawn areas, impervious areas being paved areas, roofs. Again, gravel driveway would be considered impervious. Those are all going to affect the runoff, how fast does water run off the site. Then we identify there's an overlay. These lines were the bigger letters, the A, the B, and the D. That's the current soil types. So A and B soils actually drain better. C and D soils don't drain as quickly. So we take all that information and the existing condition, we put it into a program, HydroCAD, and that kind of tells us what's happening at these points of analysis. So in the tables that you see in the reports, we were kind of analyzing the point, we're saying what's happening now, and then we will do the exact same analysis for the proposed condition. Okay, again, defining the boundaries. Now, the outer boundaries off the site obviously would stay the same. You have some flexibility with the watershed boundaries where they meet on the site. We're regrading this site, so now where's that water that part of this used to drain to South Street, we're actually bringing into the site because we have an opportunity to bring it to our large, detention practice. So you may have a little bit of variation in the watershed sizes. You have, obviously, in the developed condition, a very large variation in cover types. You see that, that's any development, whether you take a wooded lot, build a house on it, a single-family home, development this size, you're changing the hydrology. You're adding more impervious surface. So a lot of what was meadow, was in the pink, is now more impervious. So again, we do the exact same analysis. We look at how the grading has impacted the runoff. We hold the analysis points, and we rerun that model. We rerun it assuming that there are no controls, no ponds, nothing there to kind of slow it down. Because what it's doing is generating these curves. And basically, if you overlay those curves, the difference is how much volume we have to hold in each of these practices. So what you'll see in the report, there's like a pre-analysis and there's a post-controlled, which basically means now we've dropped in our stormwater practices. On the large site, we have a shallow wetland and extended detention pond. Again, that is to take that volume that was under the curve, the differential there. We know when we develop any site, you're going to have more water runoff, and it's going to come off faster. So we have to take it, we have to hold it temporarily. We put it into this basin. We have structures at the outlet to gauge and to make sure the water is going up at a rate less than there is today. And that dictates the area and the height at which these practices get designed. Okay? So that's exactly what we did for each of the two conditions. And luckily we have a lot of room in the lower area here, southern portion of the site, for the shallow wetland to provide a very, we're considering very robust stormwater system with pretty sizable reductions in runoff from the site. Calculations are still preliminary, obviously, so all of the things that we talked about tonight, setbacks, larger driveways, new pave, that all impacts the stormwater management plan. But as Lance alluded to, right now, as designed, this is per the current plan. If we reduce impervious, okay, then we have to do less from the stormwater management standpoint. The best plan of stormwater management is to reduce impervious, so you're not trying to build man-made objects that are trying to now throttle back water and so forth. So there's a great benefit in doing that. But if this plan were to be approved as is, we have the room, we've got plenty of space to do what we need to do on the site. The other portion in the stormwater management plan is treating the water from a pollutant standpoint. So in the preliminary calcs, you have rain gardens, which are very shallow depressions that have a filter media. The water goes through, gets filtered, discharged. In front of the larger pond, we have a large bioretention filter, which uses a deeper version of a rain garden. And then the shallow wetland is a constricted wetland that has 6-inch, 18-inch little depressions and allow water to settle in there, have contact with plant life, and so forth prior to being discharged. So all of those items come into play. We also have a below-ground detention system under the private drive going out to South Street, because when you take the runoff to South Street, you don't have as much land mass to put any practices in, so you may have to go with a buried type of a system.
A little more expensive, but it's what you do in one of the settings like this. And then just again, remember the back and forth. So Andy spends a couple of months coming up with that design and analysis. Lance's first few months as your consultant was to review those, make sure the application was complete, and in doing that did a very detailed review of all of those calculations. I think, was that the 123 comment letter that came back?
First one.
And then, so those are all, each comment kind of reflected a question about the underlying analysis and all that math that Andy had done. And either the math was clarified or different assumptions were plugged in at Lance's request, if you will, to modify ultimately what is the size of the retention basin we need. But right now we have what we would consider a very robust system. If we do eliminate a lot of this additional impervious surface that the system's been designed for, we go to a fairly super robust system. We haven't discussed downsizing, and I don't think we would based on the board's concerns. But elimination of impervious surface really does have some benefits. It just slows down the speed of the water and how quickly it moves, which is what flooding's all about. Right, and Joe's just reminding me that, remember, this is all set in the context of a very comprehensive state regulatory program, speedies, stormwater, design, construction, et cetera, and all of this needs to be permitted by the DEC.
Yeah, I still don't feel like I have a very good understanding of the interface between stormwater control and groundwater, existing groundwater, and the water table. Now, to me intuitively, not being a hydrogeologist, those two things are related. The stormwater control has to have some relationship to the groundwater situation and how much water is being absorbed versus runs off, whether there are aquifers, that are involved, and those kind of things. So, is there some way of better understanding, like how those two things come together, or maybe it's probably more than two, but how the interface between stormwater and groundwater works, and whether that will have any effect on especially on stormwater control. But what happens when the water table is, higher than normal, or at an outlier kind of situation? What happens to the stormwater then? Does it run off faster? Does it put the practices that you put into place in jeopardy? Sort of what.
How does that
say
Yeah,
what's the
that's
interface?
good, yeah.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to kind of understand that, when I was mentioning the soil types, okay, the A, the B soils, and the C and the D soils. Stormwater calculations are based on runoff off the surface. So they assume that when it starts to rain, okay, on an impervious surface, even impervious surface is like 2% pervious, it'll fill the cracks in there, it'll kind of seep in a little bit, but most of it will run off. And you have an A soil, it'll land, it'll take time to kind of absorb and then kind of saturate the ground before it starts to run off. So they call it a time of concentration. It takes a little while for the storm to come down, hit, saturate everything, and then you have surface runoff. So if you have C and D soils where the ground is not really pervious, you're going to have a lot more runoff on those soil types. A and B, more water will go into the soil. It will recharge groundwater. But the C and D won't recharge as much. The soil borings that we have on the site indicated that we may have some perched areas where water might go through maybe the first top 3 or 4 feet of soil, but then there might be a layer that is more restrictive, a tighter soil, a clay, there's no rock here, so we're not running into that. So you could have water that kind of sits on a perched groundwater versus groundwater coming up and saturating, kind of always filling the area. Lower in the site where we have higher groundwater, this is an overlay of the borings that were done. Thank you. I'm testing and see if we can read it upside down. So this is an overlay, because there was discussion about the original borings follow the original layout, and now we have a new layout on the site. And I think at the previous meeting I mentioned that we pretty much dotted the site and had a pretty good grid across the site. I think this drawing kind of gives a good representation of that. But as you can see in the red, we have a huge variation in groundwater that was observed on the borings. North end of the site, 17.7 feet, then you're 5.2 feet, 3.6, 16.4, greater than 38 feet. It's variable in...
So those numbers are depth of the groundwater?
Depth of groundwater that were observed at the time of the borings, or the day after they had a borehole that was left open. On the lower end of the site, we did have an at-grade that's by one of these wetlands, 5.3. So it's kind of all over the place as to where groundwater is. And to me, that kind of indicates in the geotechnical report, they did mention the presence of possible perched groundwater conditions. So, to answer your question, Rick, from a stormwater runoff standpoint, it's accounted for in the modeling in the soil type that is there. So in the A soils, more is going to go in the ground, less is going to run off. In the C and D soils, which are going to have higher groundwater levels too, you're going to have more runoff. So it doesn't really impact our calculations for stormwater. What it does is, where you have a high groundwater, we have to, for any of our practices, so the bioretention filter that I was mentioning down here, you obviously don't want to have a filter on a cross-section and it's full of water all the time. It won't do its job. Okay, you don't want to have a pond that's full of water all the time. Where we do want to have water is in the pond where we have these micro pools that are required to initially settle out water. You want to have permanent water, so if you don't have high groundwater, you put a liner, you let the water kind of pool there. In our case, we're going to take advantage of the higher groundwater on the southern end of the site to keep those micro pools full. But none of our practices are infiltration practices, so we're not taking this new runoff and putting it into the ground to get rid of it.
So that's that.
It's going to take the path of least resistance. It's not going to be down through the soil, it's going to be through these large openings that are in our structures that are holding the water back over 24, 48 hours and letting that water seep out.
Are any precautions being taken regarding the fact that our climate is getting more and more erratic? And we have, rain in degrees that we not experience. There's just the amount of rainwater. Amount of snow, I don't know what kind of winter we're going to have, but are there any precautions being taken to be able to handle abnormal amounts or ones that amass in a very short amount of time?
Not, as there are no requirements on the current DEC or the local requirements to deal with that type of condition. These are it's a 24-hour storm event that most of these are modeled after, so you could have back-to-back events. These are pretty conservative in their design. So again, they're not holding water for long periods of time, not for days. The water's supposed to come in and be gone within 24 to 48 hours. So you could have those events. If you had those would probably be more like a 500-year storm event in aggregate, in a sense, and that's beyond what the state requires you to design to. I will say that we designed with Cornell University has been monitoring the rainfall events over the years, and so they have updated their precipitation guidelines and guidance in the last 5 years for designing these systems, and so we follow that guidance.
So I'm sure it's in here, but it's been, I think, since the fire hall, since I got asked, could we quantify what that means? So I think a lot of us being sort of farm-based go, oh, how many inches per hour is that? How many inches in a day? How many, can you sort of talk about, so to me, what is a 500-year storm? I don't know. How many inches of rain can we handle? What, can you talk about
The storm that happened in Lodi, that we had, that was a 500-year storm.
And what was that?
It was 11 inches, 9 to 11 inches over a 24-hour period. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So that was a 500-year storm, 11 inches in a 24-hour period. 8-hour period. Holy. Okay, so what is this safe for?
So for the 100-year storm, it's around 7 or 8 inches over a 24-hour period. So it's local. It's not the same.
Say that one more time.
7 to 8 inches over a 24-hour period.
In 24 hours.
But
Okay.
that's a really important point. It's local. It's not a statewide standard, if you will. It's based on local conditions.
That's a local. Okay.
Local conditions. The other thing to remember is, while we have been seeing more storm events, what we've been seeing is, so the idea of a 100-year storm is it comes along once every 100 years.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is, that's not reflective of reality. What you get is 10 100-year storm events a year, right? But the system is still designed to handle a 100-year storm. Because as Andy says, this water isn't designed to stay here for a week. This is just to slow down as the overall drainage process runs, right? It's all about time with water. It goes where it's going to go. What these systems do is slow it down so that it doesn't all hit at once.
And as designed right now from the preliminary calcs, on the 100-year storm runoff, we're actually reducing it by 39%.
From what it currently exists.
Currently is, right? So again, we have local design. On the 100-year, we're reducing the 10-year storm, which are more frequent storm events, by 80%. And the 1-year storm is 50%. So on this main watershed, this main pond there, we have a huge reduction in, I think we would maintain that, again, if we can peel back impervious surfaces, we still see some very significant reductions, so it's always our intent to try to go beyond it. If you have available land, do so.
Is it also, did I hear you saying that if we got rid of that parking space in front of the main building, there'd be less impervious surfaces, but you're still not going to decrease the size of that parking? So that's even more potential collection.
Robustness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just say, as the landowner, you want to make sure that this all happens correctly, because the last thing you want is ponds or flooding in your buildings that you've spent millions of dollars. So, again, it's in our interest, our best interest, to make sure that these get designed as robustly as possible, so that we don't have damage to our property or neighboring properties.
We're going to have to bring in bulldozers to improve stormwater practices after you're over. That's a disaster.
That's the last thing we want to do.
Can I weigh in? This is probably like the 6th consecutive meeting where I just tried to slip this in, and it's just worth noting, there's something in the magnitude of 200 trees going in on this site, and this site is a field predominantly now. The landscape will drain water out of the ground and into the trees in a way that will probably have a quantitative impact on groundwater.
And hold soil in place and do all those things.
It's not an insignificant amount of trees.
Sure.
The density and the distribution is going to further aid and assist in the groundwater issue that is of paramount concern.
So Andy, what happens to the size or location of the retention ponds if you pull the buildings in? How does that, can you speak to that?
I think it'll stay pretty much, I think, the size it is right now.
So not larger, because that's definitely a
It definitely
concern.
would be larger.
for-
Right now, it's very shallow
Mhm.
because of when the grades kind of drop off at the lower part of the site. It just lends itself to that. So it's not a very deep pond right now. It's about 3 feet to the height. You kind of blend that into the environment. But
But in terms of diameter, I mean, I think that's also
Diameter-
been largely concerning to some folks, the side, the diameter.
yeah, and again, keep in mind, it's a temporary wet pond, so you're not going to have water there as a permanent, lake or anything like that full time. So, but diameter-wise, it could shrink down if we wanted to hold these
But
currently robust.
you're not foreseeing it being, if
Wouldn't
things
grow.
come in, it doesn't change the,
No, it won't get bigger, and if we can
Okay.
reduce it a little bit, that's great, but I think we're still able to meet the regs and create very substantial reductions. Once we have the land available to do that. Rick, to your last point too on the groundwater impacts, any of these water quality filters also require a certain vertical separation from any groundwater. So we would have to keep at least 2 feet above groundwater, because it's going to get to the point where you don't want to have groundwater in your filters, because they don't allow them to do their job. So there are provisions so that you wouldn't be building these filters into the groundwater and then introducing potentially pollutants into the groundwater.
What happens if you have some events that exceed the capacity and the water can't seep out over time? There isn't enough time. What's the fail-safe?
All these ponds actually have emergency spillways. So if you exceed the 100-year, there's a primary spillway and then a secondary emergency spillway. So it wouldn't back up to the buildings. It would go to the area that we want water to drain to.
Where it naturally goes anyway.
Because heaven forbid we have a low tide storm, that's a possibility. We have to make sure that it's not going to overtop the bank and erode the bank, and then you have a bank failure. So we usually armor that with snow and riprap to make sure that it has a safe conveyance.
Remember again, part of the challenge we've had is that in the US we had a lot of build out post-1950s, and we had no stormwater practices of any significant measure. Even in the late 80s, we were still behind the curve. So a lot of the surrounding neighborhood has no stormwater controls. So to the extent there is a flood event, it's the surrounding properties that are going to be more of the problem, if you will, because they have no stormwater controls versus what happens here, where it's designed for that.
So to that end, actually, and with this notion that, as it exists, before construction, after construction, would be a 39% reduction in stormwater runoff from the field that it is now. Have you given any consideration to how the existing neighborhoods might benefit from their own situations by being able to tie into construction? The point that I brought up last, like, how much better can you make the village, boys?
Yeah, well, I think we're making it better in that we're going to reduce the rate of water that's heading to South Street on the largest portion of this project that goes there. To do what you're asking, we would actually physically need to get other folks' stormwater into our practices, which, because of the topography, this drains to South Street, Pennsylvania Ave. Currently, some of these lots do drain through the site, so they're not going to get advantage per se. We're handling any water that comes through.
You're already handling that area.
Yeah,
It's already
so
taken
there's
into
some
consideration.
offsite areas that are running through the property.
So this is what you had sort of said, no, it's gonna get better for some most likely, but here we're seeing it because of this map.
Yeah,
Okay.
water won't flow uphill, so we're not going to impact anything on Pennsylvania Ave. Downstream here, again, because we have the opportunity for large practice, we can reduce the rates of runoff here, so these downstream neighbors, if, there's a swale that runs through here, and then it gets piped again before it gets into the storm system on South Street. So that's designed, sized by the village. By our reduction, that should help that system do what it's, designed to do. If
Okay.
it's plugged or whatever, obviously nothing's gonna matter what we do up here, kind of a thing. But that should help that, but in order to, help other folks, we can't really take their stormwater onto the site to really do anything within our practice.
So can you just do me the favor of tracing that? So the orange line is the site property,
Correct.
but now all your hydrology has taken into consideration these larger tracts of land, all the way up.
Just the watershed, so these properties that are on Pennsylvania Ave flow
Yeah.
through the site currently.
And then those other on
These other ones actually flow that way to South Street. So there's a high point in the roadway here, so, yeah, so this is
And
one.
given that this might change, can you send this document to Tammy?
You already have that.
Damn it, I do. Which
Tammy
one
can
was
buy on
it?
this board if you want.
Oh, no, I kind of was like, oh, water hydrology.
No, the color.
Oh, we don't have the
I think we're in
colors.
there, yeah.
Okay, but it's in here. I can't remember A, B, C, and D. It's where? Is it in this recent update with the
It's
hydrology?
not in the recent update of the bill.
Not the update, it was
Thank you.
the preliminary calculations in June.
In June. Okay, thank you.
But I can
There
read
were,
this.
I might just snap a picture.
You can
there
have-
were 3 submittals in June. I think those were the MRB submittals, response to MRB.
Yeah, we did, yes, it was
Well, what's the, okay, I'm just.
June 22nd were the revised preliminary calculations.
Thank you.
In response to MRB comments,
Okay.
as opposed to in response to public comments, as opposed to in response to TBNA comments.
Just a quick question.
Sure. Yeah, you can have.
When you said some of this water will drain in the PVC pipe that was newly put in on South Street, correct? There's a new line running to the water treatment plant.
It doesn't go to not to the water treatment plant.
Which
You're not
pipe are
using-
you using?
We're not using any. Right now, there's,
What are you using?
over the surface, there's a swale that runs through this property from this watershed, and then there's a pipe that goes back lots. I think it's.
And it's not hooked up to that pipe?
It's not hooked up to any of our system, no. It's just overland. This would be overland flow, and then that pipe has an opening that picks up a swale right now, and that runs into the storm system in
So
South Street.
it does run into the storm system?
Yeah, not sanitary.
Right.
Yeah, so the
You're right,
sanitary
the
is
storm system.
Right. And what
I
we're
know
Where
doing,
does, ultimately, where does that drain?
Down South Street, and I think it's basically up and getting down to the creeks, further southeast, all the way southeast crosses.
right. So what we're doing is substantially reducing the amount of runoff that enters that pipe now, after a storm. And, does that make sense?
We're not modifying that pipe system at all?
Right.
We're
On our pipe
sizing it,
system,
but-
doesn't anything to do.
Excuse me, anyone else on the board have some water issue questions this time? No? Okay.
We did have one more topic.
We're
We
ready.
wanted affordable housing. You had some questions about how the for sale affordable units work. It has gotten a little late. Joe has a PowerPoint, but he also has handouts. Would it be easier to just run through the handouts? Or should
I
we-
could also just give them to you this week, and if you have questions, we could talk about them another time.
I think that let's have the handouts, and since this is still sort of part of the applicant update section that we separate into our questions of discussion, let's look at the handouts and have you give us an overview though. I think that really what we're looking for is just, make as simple as you can this notion and quantify the affordable levels and what that means, because we all know how much we earn annually. Thank you.
So the goal of the Affordable For Sale program is that basically we allow our people the opportunity to buy a home for a sales price that's much below market. And that somebody, a family, whether that's an individual or a family of 5, doesn't spend more than 50 or 30% of their income on housing. And that's housing on the for sale side is their mortgage, principal, interest, their insurance, and their taxes. So the other goal of the program, so in order to do that, and in this case we're selling houses for $112,000, newly constructed homes for $112,000, $120,000, $130,000, but they're costing us $300,000 to build. So we're raising money through state and federal and local resources to subsidize that cost down. And the other goal of our program is that we don't lose that subsidy over time. So if we sell someone a house for $120,000, but that house is actually worth $300,000, they don't buy it for $112,000 and then in 3 years sell it for $300,000, because we would have lost all of that state and federal resources. So that's why we've created this housing trust model, where basically we own the land, INHS, and we sell the house to the homeowner, and that keeps us in the chain of title, and it requires them, whoever buys the house, to resell that house either to us or to another low-income or moderate-income homeowner. That's basically the way the program works. On the second page is the income information. So basically, we have 2 columns here, and it's all broken down by household size. The low-income maximum, that's the first column, is people earning 60% or less of the area median. And the second column is people earning 80% or less. So just for people who aren't looking at this, if you have a household size of 3 people at 80%, that's a family of 3 earning $81,650. A family of 1 at 80% is $63,500. So what we do is the people, so if you are a household of 3 earning $81,000, we set the purchase price so that you're not paying more than 30% of that income for your housing.
I just realized that people with their various concerns are looking at this from 2 opposite ends. So I'm looking at it and saying, oh, so if you're a tasting room manager in the Finger Lakes who makes $33,000 a year, you technically are overspending if you're buying a house for $112,000, because 33% is $36,000. So that just puts it into like, right, versus other people being like, oh, people aren't making at least, and we should have, and who's got and don't have. So that's fascinating. Thanks. Sorry, Colin.
Sure.
Joe, do you just want to explain equity and how someone builds up equity? That rules?
So, yeah, there was some question about, so when somebody sells a house, can they earn any equity? Or do we restrict the equity that they can earn? And we do restrict the equity that they earn to basically, there's a formula in here, but it is late, so you can take a look at it. But it's 2% of their original purchase price per year over the number of years that they own the property. That's sort of the basic way of understanding it. So in this example, someone bought the house for $112,000 and they lived in it for 8 years.
Wait, where are you? I'm sorry, where's the
This
example?
is page 3 of your handout.
Example
It
resale.
says example resale formula.
Thank you.
So really, we're looking at what they paid at the original, when they bought the house, what they paid
Okay,
versus what it was appraised for.
okay,
In that case, they bought the house for $112,000, it was appraised for $194,000. So they paid 58% of the appraised value. Then they go and resell, they want to resell the property in 8 years. We do that same analysis again. We look at the appraisal. In this case, the estimate is it's $226,000 in 8 years now. We multiply it by 58%, so their resale price is $131,000 in year 8. So that's a difference of $19,000 in that case. So we look at that $19,000 and then we say, well, what would 2% per year over 8 years be? And that comes out to be $17,920. So in this case, that family is going to earn off the sale of their house $17,920. And then they will have also, because they lived in the house for 8 years, have paid down their mortgage. And so the difference between the principal now and what they paid down, they'll also be able to earn that.
So it really is an ability for a starter house, if you will, build up some equity so you can really have some money to roll into something.
So these are tax appraisals?
No, they are appraisals from a third-party appraiser.
I see. And so then how is the tax calculated?
So right now, the taxes are different depending on the municipality you're in, because there's a state law that says if the municipality opts in to this program, they should tax this house at the resale value, not the appraised value. So again, the resale value in this case was $131,000, but it appraised at $226,000. The county, before that law was passed, would be taxing folks on $226,000. And so it was making it unaffordable, basically. So it's, the city of Ithaca, the town of Ithaca, the county have all opted into this law. In Trumansburg, the school board has also opted in, the city of Ithaca. So in Trumansburg, none of the village, the town of Ulysses, the school board has not opted in. So that would have to be something we go through in order to have you assess the property at the resale, not the appraised value.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. Did anyone have any more? Just actually maybe even my question right there, so that's for you.
We also just provided examples of our for sale records in the city and in the town.
Cool, okay, so we sort of melded together the notion of the applicant update with all the questions we were gonna discuss as a group, and recognizing that, you know, we set a time for agenda items is, what do the pirates say? They're guidelines, maybe guidelines. And so sometimes we go over and sometimes topics meld, but I do want to make sure that we have time for public comment. And so given that, if it's all right with the board, and having heard that there are working on the South Street thing, maybe we table the Pennsylvania entrance questions now. Do we want to tackle walkability or the nurse's school driveway at this time?
Let's give them a chance.
Okay. Did you, I mean, your game, he's like, it's 9:15, so he's planning on until 10.
However long it takes.
Do you want, well, what about, John, I mean, what about the nursery school driveway? I know that those were things that you had really sort of studied, or are you wanting to wait and see what the entrance from the roads look like to get into that?
I guess I thought that would be a much more free-flowing and in-depth discussion than we can get to
I feel like that's kind of linked to the walkability
Yeah.
issue too, though I would say to Andy, the question that I had of, no, any sidewalks to Pennsylvania Avenue, if there is an entrance there, how that changes hydrology is something to consider. I don't know.
Yeah, just be working into the stormwater plan. We're adding, we're reducing, it just works into the final counts. So
Okay.
it wouldn't dramatically change the approach.
Okay.
so to speak.
But we can certainly start with walkability and the nursery school entrance.
Yeah, and I think, right, you'd be prepared to talk about, because it's super hot, I mean, like,
Oh,
it's
yeah, no.
like, that's why I think probably a large portion of our friends are here with us, is they really like to talk about the streets. And so would we, but we are recognizing there's time and that no stone will be returned, so, okay. Good? Santa, I had to make eye contact, oh, good, okay. So then let's go ahead, oh wait, I did that without Tammy, where's Tammy? All right, so this is what I'll say, is that we established a protocol of 3 minutes per public comment. People, did you put up a sign-up form out there, Hannah? Did you see there's, if folks signed to comment? There wasn't a sign-in, I might not have
It doesn't say
gotten.
what it is. It was just a
sign
sign
in.
wrap.
Hello, first meeting after break. So then, I guess we'll just be really kind to each other, and we'll recognize that the 3-minute clock is not any voice other than time as it was constructed by not me. And we can open up to 15 minutes of public comment, it being 8:50. I don't want to, so I think you should maybe stand up and state your name, Paula, since I saw her hand first, and then I see Camille's after.
Yeah, my name's Paula Horrigan. I live at 355 Pennsylvania Avenue. I just want to talk about parking, since you spent a lot of time talking about that tonight. And just draw your attention to our zoning, because this applicant came in from the beginning saying that they were doing everything by right and conforming to our zoning. And if you as a planning board had an option to ask them to do a cluster, which would have enabled you to give a lot of the kind of concessions we've been hearing about tonight, including land banking, reduced parking standards, the decreasing of the front yard setbacks, the clustering of buildings. You could have done all that with a cluster. And this applicant was very aware also, especially because they have a lawyer, and who's done a lot of development, they could have done a planned development area and a cluster. And all the professionals who are here also know that they could have done a creative design that was responsive to this community. So we wouldn't even be having these conversations about how to backpedal on their bad design, which was done in conformance with the zoning. And one of the things I just want to draw your attention to is one of the bad design things is that they put all of the parking in the front yard setback. And our zoning is really clear. It says in section 701.4, parking design standards, there shall be no parking in any front yard, side yard, or rear yard required setback areas except in established driveways. Now I looked up driveway. Driveway is a noun. It's a short road leading from a public road to a house or garage. And Ryan talked to us tonight about how they're double stacking cars in a driveway. That's one way to accommodate parking. Makes sense, reduces the asphalt and so on. There are 45 spaces in parking spaces that are accessed by a driveway in the front yard setback of the big mega building. And there's another 6 or 7 in the front yard setback that are accessed via a curved driveway that goes in front of the nursery school. So we have in this development parking in the front yard, not in driveways. And of course, you could have used your circular drive and done stack to stack. Ryan could have done stacking of 50 cars. That would have been hard. You didn't have definitely to move people that way. But basically, we have front yards with, 60 parking spaces. Okay, now we have the applicant coming tonight saying they want to reduce the number of parking spaces down to 1.2. That's proof that they can't fit their program for two parking spaces for this large building on that site. They cannot fit it without putting it in the front yard. And now tonight they've come and asked also to decrease the setback to 25 feet. Well, guess what? When you move a big building, and in my experience, bigger buildings have larger front yards. You don't put them close to the front. They're going to move these buildings closer so they can put more parking behind. There's evidence here that they have done a design that cannot accommodate the program given the size of that site. So, you know,
Thank you,
I'm really
Paula.
disappointed in all these professionals here for what they've done.
Thank you. Camille, SIR next.
Camille Toronto, 104 Tamarack. It's more of a question. I thought there was an issue with this drive, that you were questioning this drive. If it moves back, doesn't that change the whole drainage issue? Because isn't there water, you know, isn't there going to be an issue up here? We don't know where this is going to be. Because you had asked, you know, the board had asked last time about this. So will that then create a, you know, I want you to think about whether that's going to create another drainage issue that they haven't considered at this moment, or they have and they're just ignoring it. But I'm curious about that. I think I'd say that.
Thank you, Camille. You want to do kind of an honor for hands? I see my friend here with her hand there.
Hi, my name is Danny Mizzi. I'm a new resident. I live at 47 South Street, and it was quite a surprise to me when I selected Trumansburg. I moved here from North Carolina, and I wanted to come to a particular kind of community when I found out the density and other implications of this development right across from my street. One of the things that I am particularly interested in are the roads, and that's why I came tonight. So the first thing that I want to say, it is extremely disrespectful to everyone else who came here prepared to talk about what was on the agenda for you to change the agenda. I didn't come prepared to, I hadn't looked into it, I didn't read up on that. So I think that you should be mindful that people whose time is precious come here and expect an agenda. And I think that you should really consider sticking to it. The other thing is that I would like to ask all of you, and I'm going to look particularly at one member, and I read the rules, so I'm not supposed to call out any of you, but a neighbor here, Bill O'Connor, has asked questions since May 2017. At the 6:15 planning meeting, 7:13 email, 10:05 email, 1:18 public comment, and most recently, a letter on December 30th. And I want to know, when are these questions about turning radiuses and collector roads and all of the questions that he raised and quoted section by section, and I can use up my 3 minutes to point you to those sections. When are we going to get the answers to those questions? Because this is not a timely response to public concerns. So when are we going to get those answers?
Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to use up more time to cite specific things so
Oh,
we
I
can make sure
could.
we get to it? It's up to you.
No, I'd like to turn it over to Bill because he knows these better than I do.
Okay. Well, I guess it's my turn now.
Do you want to start fresh, Bill, or
So,
I'm not sure?
I didn't
Yeah,
plan
well,
on
we're
it,
not
but-
allowed to cede minutes to anybody else, that's in the rules too.
So, I think you all know my concerns. I agree. I am frustrated. Drove 2 hours to be here tonight at 7 o'clock to talk about roads. It's disappointing. So I'll just leave it at that. But listening to what the topic ended up being tonight, we talked about context and creating a neighborhood. We already have a neighborhood here. The neighborhood's been here for a couple hundred years. And the house was built, I think, 1840s. So we already have context. We already have a neighborhood. That building, it's just ironic that we're talking about context of driveways. When you look at this plan, there's nothing on South Street that looks like that. No one in this room lives in a building that looks like that. Nowhere near the size. So it just, I must say, it's real frustrating when you talk about context of a 25 versus 50-foot driveway. When you have this monstrosity of a building next to a house that's been there since 1840. I'll just end. I hope we can really talk about roads and the law, because the rest of this stuff is immaterial until we get past the law. And you have the attorney here tonight. Maybe he can help us out and explain it to us, because we've been waiting a long time, and it's frustrating. So thank you.
Yeah, so I think that that's the intention, and no, I won't obviously make my voice take away from any further public comment, but Danny, I'm sure you maybe have written an agenda in your life, and we don't always get to stick to the same time that we hope, and there are several other topics on there that we have intended to address. We can hear my answer, or we can just not. I can not answer. I'm happy, because I know that next meeting, we are talking about the roads. And I acknowledged before public comment that that was actually the most important topic, and I think all of your minds. So it's happening, and I'm really sorry that everyone thinks that that could have or should have happened before, and it just hasn't. Because this is how it's going, and this is the process. So, and I appreciate everyone's time, and we appreciate ours. So that's all I want to say about that. Thank you, Bill, thank you, Danny. So next hand, I think, is Sarah, unless I missed someone in between.
Sarah Adams, 4 Fall Street. I'd like to echo some of that frustration. You're the chair, Jessica. You set the agenda. They came in, they decided to change it completely, and it's not fair to people, the public who come here expecting certain topics to be discussed. So I just hope in the future this doesn't happen, because it's really, really upsetting.
So I thank you for that, and I know that it would be great if this were actually all in my control. And it sort of is, and it sort of isn't. I would point out that 2 topics did not get discussed, and 2 other topics also did not get discussed, and it is 9 o'clock. Thank you. We will endeavor as a team, as everyone got to see the agenda before it was posted, to work on a better timeline such that everyone is not inconvenienced. I think that we should take one more public comment since I have done some speaking.
Oh,
Well, at least, whatever. Sorry, I can't remember your name, which is awful of me.
My name is Elizabeth Meyer, and I just have a question, and it's regarding parking for the nursery school. Is that something that's going to be introduced to the public?
Yeah, I believe nursery school driveway parking and all of that is part of the next, hopefully the next topic.
But
the next
parking
meeting.
is a big subject tonight. Should that not have been covered?
Oh, I don't know, just didn't. But it's on there.
I would just say that the nursery school would have however many parking spaces they would require, which is, we're not planning on changing the parking in nursery school.
What is
But we'll certainly talk about that as we talk about the layout of the nursery school and the roadways and the entrances and the fronts and the backs and what side setbacks change. So yeah, we definitely will get addressed.
The parking is identified in the application, for sure.
Jack?
Jack Cass, 13 South Street. A lot to say, so little time. Anyhow, the developers came here with their statement saying, we need no variances, we need no other things in our developer rights. And now they're asking for a lot of variances. And the plan has changed very dramatically as far as the setbacks. If they do go ahead with that, is the zoning board allowed to change the law 50% or 42%, considering that we have a zoning law, and though the zoning board interprets the law, they can't make the law. And this is a huge difference between what is set down and what they're proposing to do. Like, there's supposed to be 2.3 people in Tompkins County per unit, and now they're suggesting 1.2 parking spaces. Well, if there are 2 people, let's say one of them goes to work, the other one doesn't, maybe they have a kid that drives. So this is a giant reduction. I mean, it's almost half. So this isn't a small matter, and I'm not sure that the zoning board has the capability to enact a variance of this size without the law being changed. And there are a whole lot of other things, but I'll just let it sit at that.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more? Is there another comment? Right there. Wait. Oh, a couple more. I can't see you. Stop the minute first.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Dana. I also reside at 47 South Street. And I have some serious concerns. This is the first meeting I've been to, and let me just say this, I'm shocked by the behavior. As a 23-year-old, I've seen a lot of immaturity in my life, but this was like nothing I've ever seen. Last time I checked, that you guys determined the agenda and what was supposed to be talked about. Not him. I don't know his name, sorry. The map that we were shown about the water, they continued to say that it was going to drain through South Street over land. It's a wetlands. I don't know why you're building in it. It's a terrible idea. The only thing that should be built in a wetlands, in my opinion, is a fishery, because that's where they thrive. This is supposed to drain over water, which is basically onto South Street. And I don't know if you know this, they had put in a sidewalk on South Street where the drainage pit used to be. So by doing this, you are having all of the water run off past the road, not into a drainage ditch, but into many people's properties. And as they said, that is not their responsibility, but it's yours, because this is not acceptable. Last time I checked, this was supposed to be about changing the community, but keeping it the same. And I am in favor of affordable housing, trust me, but this is not the responsible way to go about it. Even when you speak about equity, you're saying you're going to force them to resell the houses to you. Like, I'm sorry, that does not seem appropriate to me. You should be building responsibly. And when you say the 1 in 100-year storms, we have had so many 1 in 500-year storms in the past 10 years that maybe the zoning board things aren't up to date. But we should be looking to the future and look at that plan and say, if we get another one of these storms, what's going to happen to the water? And I don't think you should be building for codes that were set in the 70s. You should be building for the future. And this shows a lack of caring where this community is going.
Thank you. Who had another hand next to Jeff?
So I'll echo the disappointment in the room that we sat through 95 minutes of stuff that means absolutely nothing if you don't create the true access to the property. That's why we're in here. Figure out if you're going to be able to access the property legally before you even get into all of this detail that you just guys went and spent all this time doing. It's ridiculous. Cart before the horse. Come on.
Okay, I thought there was maybe one other hand before Sophia.
There was.
Has it changed its mind? Is there someone else who'd like to speak? No? Anyone? Okay, thank you for the public comment. I would, in opening old business, like to acknowledge Jeff before you go. We did get payment from rehab.
I did speak to Gordon about that.
Okay, great. I wanted to bring that up. Jeff had asked about invoices and due to the current tax year and keeping that all on. So I just wanted the board, in case they hadn't seen that, to know that payment had been made. Thanks for everyone who did their jobs in that. Oh, fiscal year 2, that's right. So, but I know I made it into whatever calendar. Thank you, Tammy. Do we have any other old business?
Old business. Yes, we did have one item which we were going to talk about. Do it at the next meeting. Stop sign, possibly the collision of.
The board is working on that.
Oh, the board is working on that.
So I
So,
don't think,
I called the mayor and I didn't hear back from him, so I wasn't sure things had gotten along.
Yeah,
But I'm glad they're working.
yeah, the trustees have.
Very good.
I also wanted to know if there's an update on a planning position. Has that been put out?
There isn't a planner position open at this point. This is, we have to fill the zoning officer position first.
so there's not okay, there's not a position posted.
There's
I feel like there's something else associated. There's maybe just, it sort of hinges, it's like both things are needed, how is it gonna play out, and the job description might be being
Right,
looked
but
at.
right now we have.
So not like it's abandoned as an idea.
No, and it won't be because it's a civil service position, not it's considered
regardless. But a zoning officer, by statute, we are required to have, is that not correct, Guy?
You have to have someone who acts as a
As a
zoning
zoning
officer
officer,
under
yes.
village law, and your zoning ordinance follows the standards of pretty much all town. Sometimes it's a code officer, sometimes it's a zoning officer, sometimes it's a planner, but there's always someone who's principally in charge of interpretive questions that can go to the ZBA, etc.
So we had gotten a couple of applications, I forwarded them to the mayor, and that's what we said.
Okay,
But
so
the zoning
was
officer.
there a position?
Your time is up. No, we have not posted a planner position, but it is my understanding that we're.
Is there a reason that you can't do both at the same time?
Is there a reason we can't post both at the same time? I don't know.
Yeah, it sounded to me like you were saying we need the zoning officer.
No, what I'm saying is I'm having, permission to post both. I have permission to post the zoning officer, so that's what I got.
So I think you could follow up directly with Jordan.
Yeah.
And
We as a board, you know, again.
let's duly note out loud again.
Yes, again, really like that.
Well, you said it on November 29th, and I sent the message back, and.
And we sent an email.
Yeah, so, and the board hasn't met, they'll meet, not next Monday, the 14th, I think is our meeting, and I'm sure that it's a positive discussion. How's that? Stay tuned.
Okay. Any other, I don't think there's any other on business. The order of new business, right, so we sent out that email, so all of those zoning questions that we have, or the public has, Tom is graciously acting as interim zoning officer amongst all the other busy things he does in our town and village. So he's and it's a position that he has filled before. So that is that.
New business, maybe we could, since we're quite busy with, old business, maybe a mini panel. We need to discuss solar, where it goes.
Solar?
Where it doesn't go, how it's installed.
Location of solar.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
starting to have issues, and we might as well have some guidelines as to what happens. Because there's been some problems that are evolving with clear cutting of forests and trees, and they're going in strange locations. And we
Yeah.
have currently, there's no put it here, but don't put it there.
So I think that to that end too, Vicki, as you think of things, or anyone else thinks of things, they can forward them to the clerk. I don't have an email for that committee. That's our email?
I would be happy to take it.
Okay, so you can forward those ideas or suggestions to Tammy,
I
because
know
there is a zoning,
brochures
there's a
also.
zoning revision committee, and a comprehensive plan committee review that's happening, so those are definitely an area where that can get tackled, if not anywhere else.
And cooperative extension has the great literature drops in.
I think the town also has a solar ordinance.
Some guidelines.
That oversees it, so you can check that out.
I seem to remember that circulated at some point, I can't remember if it was to the planning board or to the zoning revision committee, or whether that was just Matt sent something out, but yeah, there's.
Might be good to have, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel,
Right.
use whatever they have.
I mean, they've got a
Extensions.
totally different situation in the town than it is in the village, but they have some experience with it.
And another thing on my mind is that really this notion of water mitigation, I think speaks to, like, when you look at the map of the town of Ulysses and the village, I mean, we're so sweet. And so what is the, maybe getting a discussion, and I don't know how we facilitate that, what is the town's water mitigation program that you need to change in climate? Like what, I don't know if you just go to a town meeting and say, hey, what's going on, I'm just a citizen, what's happening, but maybe there's. So I think that I'm just going to follow up by maybe talking to the town supervisor and our mayor and maybe our village board and saying, I think the public would like to hear at large what our community is doing, because this one site plan review is never going to be fixed. And it's on our minds, so that might be. Talk to him. Okay. Okay, great. But yeah. So there's one other bit of new business that has to do with clothes. Yeah, you are all welcome to leave. Is that we are going to do a conference for the application for the building application for 22 Peak Street. Will be a site plan conference as is RFA, and then if it's determined that a full site plan review is necessary for this single family residence, then that's determined, but so I'll just be contacting you. So in order at 22 Lake Street, that's already there. So it just needs to be made, it needs to make sure that the lot is in compliance because it's in a stream overlay district. And so one avenue open to us, as is pointed out, is that we can do a conference. So we don't have to get into all of that right now. The applicant isn't here. I just wanted to, since we're never bored all together, except now.
I see, so there's
There's
an
people
exception,
from there.
for the single-family residence.
No, it's just, I just wanted to reiterate.
District.
There is no exception. So when construction happens in the stream overlay, there's supposed to be it can go to site plan review. But in the planning board of site plan review, there is this option to have a site plan conference first, where you really get the details of the build. And then within that, you can determine what aspect of site plan review you need. For example, if everything is, and correct me Guy, jump in anytime I'm wrong, if the plan of the land development is such that the area you're trying to protect is all fully protected, then that can be deemed in compliance, and it doesn't require topography maps and all of the big expense and detail of site plan review.
My
But
question
it's
is
all been done already.
more basic.
No, but we have to go through it. It hasn't. We could say, whoa, 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 whoa.
But, I mean, the site has been prepped. It's been,
But it didn't actually get fully reviewed, so it has to be reviewed.
no, I mean, I'm hoping it is. I'm a little bit confused. You're saying the conference will lead to a site plan review?
Yeah.
But the problem there is it's a lot of fait accompli.
Yeah, but it's, that's.
In other words, what does that leave us to work with?
That's what we're gonna find out in the conference.
Oh, and that's been scheduled?
It hasn't been scheduled, so I'll make contact to see which two of you would like to volunteer.
All right.
So I'm sorry, you're moving too fast.
Sorry.
But, okay, so the basic rule is single-family house, no site plan.
No, they have
required.
that. Right.
No,
Oh,
that's the basic rule.
yes, sorry,
That's
yes.
the basic rule.
Yes.
So why is this an exception to that rule?
It's in the stream overlay district.
And they were peering.
I see.
Yeah.
And so that requires a site?
Yes, kind of, and then that's actually something that we'll bring to the zoning review committee as well, because
It could reach.
it's a big thing. It could, but the conference, a view of the site in general will determine whether or not what is intended and has been started is safe or requires.
It's pretty far along.
But, so there we are.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize it was in an overlay district.
Yeah, and neither when the permit
I
was
guess the
issued.
permit must have been issued despite.
Accidentally, so it's, I mean, human, so we're fixing what
Yeah, no.
we can do.
All right, so you need to make that right.
Yeah. And right back. Okay, any other new business? Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you very quietly, says she so moved. John seconds. All in favor?